In June 1917, a British bomber took off from an airbase near London carrying two 110-pound bombs under its wings. The target was a German Zeppelin base at a place called Weinsberg. With 2 crew members on board, the plane flew out into the darkness, dropped its bombs, and then returned to base safely. This marked the first time ever that a plane had taken off, flown to a pre-selected target, and returned home again, completing what we today call a combat sortie. And yet this pioneering mission remains almost unknown. So who were the men behind it? What plane did they fly, and why is their achievement so important? The story of the world's first bomber plane and its crew is a story of innovation, courage, hardship, and above all else, teamwork. But before we get into that, a word from our sponsor. The First World War had been raging for 3 years when these men took flight. By 1916, air warfare had become established. But while dogfights between fighter planes became commonplace, bombers were still in their infancy. At the start of the war, Zeppelins were the main way of moving large payloads over long distances. In fact, the first air-dropped bomb of the war was dropped by a German Zeppelin on London in January 1915. But Zeppelins were slow and vulnerable to attack. They were also too big to operate effectively from most air bases, which led to the development of the first purpose-built bomber aircraft. Now, there are differing opinions as to which aircraft was the very first purpose-built bomber. There were various aircraft designed to carry small loads of bombs in 1914 and 1915. But in my opinion, the first purpose-built bomber was the Gotha G4. A twin-engine German bomber which made its first flight in October 1916. It was one of several designs that featured a central twin-engine fuselage with 2 open-air cockpits, one for the pilot and one for the gunner, and with space in between them for up to 4 bomb racks. Unlike the Gotha, most early bombers could only carry 1 or 2 small bombs. But despite their primitive nature, these aircraft proved successful. For example, in March 1917, a pair of Gothas managed to drop 28 bombs on Paris, killing more than 20 civilians. Such attacks prompted the British Air Board to ask the question, could we do it better? Specifically, they wanted to know if it was possible to build an aircraft that could travel further, faster, and with a larger payload than the Germans. Enter William Charles Billy Bishop, Captain Bishop. As his service record states, Billy Bishop was born on February 8, 1896, in the village of Port Stanley in the Canadian province of Ontario. Like many Canadians, Bishop grew up hearing tales of the daring feats of the famous aerial pioneers such as the Wright brothers and Louis Blériot. Inspired by these stories, he spent his teenage years building model airplanes. He even tried to enlist in the Royal Flying Corps at age 16, but was rejected because he was underage. So he worked as a pilot on a flying school circuit for the next few years, until he was finally accepted into the RFC as a trainee pilot in April 1916. After training, he was posted to France and Belgium in September 1916. Throughout 1916, Captain Bishop flew a variety of fighter and reconnaissance aircraft such as the Nieuport 17 and the Bristol F-2B. He scored several aerial victories, including the destruction of a Fokker Doctor 1 triplane piloted by Germany's famous Red Baron, Manfred von Richthofen. But his true passion lay in the emerging role of the bomber pilot. In November 1916, Bishop was selected to take part in a top-secret project whose goal was to develop a plane that could carry a large enough bomb load to make a difference in the war. Despite being a fighter pilot, Bishop had volunteered for this new bomber unit and trained with it during November and December. On New Year's Eve 1916, he took delivery of the first completed prototype, known as the BEC-1. The BEC-1 was a modified version of the Bristol F-2B, Britain's best fighter at the time. Its most notable feature was a large, rectangular fuselage which housed a crew of 3. A pilot, a navigator, and a gunner, as well as a payload of bombs. The prototype was powered by a single 300-horsepower Rolls-Royce Eagle 8 engine, which drove a single propeller. A second prototype followed in January 1917, and both prototypes were then sent to the recently formed 19th B Squadron stationed at RAF Upper Drem near Edinburgh, equipped with improved engines and larger bomb loads. The two prototypes were designated B2S. The squadron began training with these aircraft throughout the winter. But poor weather and mechanical issues plagued the new bombers. The situation was made worse by the fact that the B-2 was underpowered and sluggish, making it easy prey for German fighters. In fact, one of the prototypes was shot down in January 1917. So it was decided that the type would have to undergo major redesign before it could be deployed in combat. The resulting design was called the B-2A, which entered production in February 1917. The first production BE-2AS saw service in May 1917. On June 1917, one of these B-2AS took off from Upper Deham at 8:30 p.m. under the command of Captain Bishop. His navigator was Lieutenant Frederick William Dunk McLean, a 21-year-old Canadian who had joined the RFC as a probationary pilot in October 1915. McIntosh had trained as a bomber pilot and had been posted to the 19th Squadron in March 1917. His gunner was Sergeant Alfred Edward Ginger Philpott, a veteran of the Western Front who had joined the RFC in September 1915 after serving in the British Army. Philpott had originally been a driver, but had been trained as a gunner after suffering an injury. It's not known exactly why this particular plane was chosen for this mission, but it may have been because it was the newest and therefore the best maintained. Whatever the reason, the trio took off into the darkness and headed west. Their mission was to reach the Zeppelin base at Weinsberg and drop a pair of 110-pound bombs on it. As the plane approached Germany, McIntosh tracked the course using a navigational compass, while Philpott manned the Lewis gun in case of enemy fighters. Bishop, meanwhile, flew the plane expertly, although he was suffering from dysentery, a painful intestinal disease contracted earlier in the war. Upon reaching their target, the crew dropped their bombs and then turned the aircraft around, all the while keeping an eye out for German fighters. Eventually, they made it back to Upper Drem without being detected. And so it was that the first combat sortie in the history of aviation had been completed. Unfortunately, the victory was short-lived. In July, Bishop was promoted and transferred to the newly formed No. 49 Squadron. He would later serve as station commander at RAF Kenley, and go on to train many famous pilots, including Douglas Bader and Johnny Johnson. Sadly, he was killed in a flying accident in August 1928 while testing a new aircraft. He was just 32 years old. After the war, McIntosh continued to serve in the Royal Air Force. He was mentioned in dispatches in 1918 and retired from active duty in 1920 with the temporary rank of captain. He died in Toronto in 1970. Philpott remained in the RAF until 1921, seeing service in the Middle East and Asia. He left the RAF as a flight lieutenant and died in 1965. Today, there is a plaque commemorating the first bombing raid in the Church of St. John the Baptist in Great Ayton, where the crew had stopped for fuel and made some minor repairs on their way to Upper Demoth. There is also a memorial in Bishop's hometown of Port Stanley. The First World War ended in November 1918. The armistice was signed on board a ship in the middle of the North Sea to avoid it falling into German hands. The document was signed by representatives of the Allied powers and Germany's 4 frontline combatants, but not by those nations' leaders. Still, it was duly ratified by each country, and thus, after more than 4 years of bitter fighting, hostilities ceased. But if you want to learn about the cost of ending that conflict, then check out this video here. Thanks so much for watching. Please like and share this video, and tell me in the comments what you think the outcome of the war would have been if planes like the BE-2A had been more widely available. If you haven't already, please subscribe to my channel. I'll see you next time.